there are moments where Twitter is wonderful. And I think we saw, not just Twitter, but social media today with, you talked about your Brazil team being named. And, obviously the social media people, they have cameras set up. And it just absolutely warmed my heart to see time and time again these players. And, as I said on Twitter today, these videos of players receiving the news that they are going to go to a World Cup, I can't get enough of them. And it doesn't matter, how famous you are, how much money you're making, how successful you have been at whatever club it is that you play. This is the World Cup. This is something different. This is something special. And for a lot of these young men, this is the realization of a dream that they have had since they were a boy, watching the World Cup and dreaming that, who knows, maybe someday I will get to put on my country's shirt and I will get to go out. And it is a surreal moment when you are given, these very, very selective keys to this castle. And Mosse, you were wonderful today in terms of sending all of these different videos out there of all of them. Was there one that you liked more than others?
Well, I think Pedro was the best one because not only was the joy of making the World Cup squad, but he then turned around and proposed to his girlfriend. So this was a big day in his life. It makes you wonder if he hadn't gotten picked, would he still have proposed to her on this day? I mean, did it have to be like a package deal there? I don't know.
Right. Well, speaking of not getting picked, a couple of people asked me in Ask Alexi, they asked me about my experience, and I'll go back to 1994. For those that don't remember, back in 1994, the the World Cup was played in the U.S. We were a team, unlike other national teams, in that we were in camp and together for basically 2 years leading up to the World Cup. And within those 2 years, I was a young upstart. I had not been on the 1990 World Cup team. So the only thing that I cared about was being on that final roster when it came to the final. At that point, it was 22 players. That's all that I cared about. I didn't care about starting. I didn't care about playing. That was my initial goal, and that's what I wanted to do. And everything that I did every single day was geared to that moment when I knew that I was picked for that 22-man roster. We found out ultimately who was on, and maybe more importantly, who was not on, in the parking lot of a Laguna Beach parking lot, because we were training down there in Mission Viejo, and we would run on the beach and we would do different things. And we were coming down to it. Obviously, the World Cup started in June. We were coming down to the end of May, and it was final cuts. And it became very, very clear, and it was made very clear to us that the final cuts were going to be made at this certain date. And I vividly remember, this was a no news is good news type of situation. I vividly remember in that parking lot, after having run on the beach with the team, the final cuts being made. And, for every person that makes a team, there is a person that doesn't make the team. And it is brutal. Great athletes, you will be, I don't know if you're surprised or not, but great athletes are incredible at compartmentalizing. Great elite athletes are ruthless, okay? It doesn't mean that they can't feel. It doesn't mean that they don't have emotions. It doesn't mean that they can't have sympathy or empathy. But there is a competitive streak and a ruthless streak that makes you focus on yourself, because that is ultimately what your job is, and ultimately it is about survival. And this was the ultimate type of survival. My roommate, Jeff Agus, on that day got cut. He was one of the final cuts and did not get to experience that moment that we saw play out today for your Brazil players, Mosse. Instead, all of that work that he had done, basically 2 years leading up to what was going to be the payoff, which was playing in a World Cup, and not just a World Cup in your own country, that was snatched away from him. Now, Jeff Agus continued on, worked his ass off, and was part of future World Cup teams. So again, it's not the end. In that moment, you feel it's the end. And I'll never forget driving home to our apartment that I shared with him. And I was going to the World Cup, and he was not going to the World Cup. And yes, it was, difficult and brutal and awkward, but the mentality of athletes is better you than me. Having said that, then you get to celebrate the accomplishment that you have made. And as I said, for me in that moment, I didn't know whether I was going to start. I didn't know if I was going to get on the field, but I was part of that team. And you can't start or get on the field unless you're first part of that team. And I'll never forget the feeling when I knew that I was going to be part of the World Cup team, that I was going to represent my country in the World Cup. Now, I didn't grow up in an era and in a country and in a culture where I was watching the World Cup from a really, really young age. The first World Cup that I ever watched, I was probably 16 years old, okay? But it didn't mean that I didn't appreciate it and that I didn't feel this incredible feeling when that moment came. And there are players that are feeling it today, on both sides, by the way. The ones that are feeling the joy and the pride and the opportunity of being given that privilege to represent their country, and others that aren't going to. And they are feeling that pain and even shame, if you will, although you shouldn't. But it's inevitable because they are humans. And so 2 weeks from now, they are then going to get their opportunity to possibly step on the field and live out that boyhood dream of playing in a World Cup. And I love it. I'm here for every bit of it. I know there's going to be a lot of talk about this World Cup and a lot of different takes, and that's all fine and well. But ultimately, this is about these players that are going to live a dream. And we get to televise it, and we get to see it, and we get to see some of these incredible stars, some of these incredibly, rich and adorned stars almost become children again, because it's not about money. It is about their country, and it's about representing their country, and there is nothing better.
You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.